here we are, Traktor X1 MK3, let's go! In this review, I'll try to cover all the possible areas of this controller, and if I missed something, let me know in the comments so that maybe I'll create a follow-up video. As a disclaimer, this unit was sent to me by Native Instruments for free, but I don't have any obligations as to what I can and cannot say about it. The first X1 was released 13 years ago, in 2010, which by the way I had, followed by X1 Mark II 3 years later in 2013. The Mark II stayed on the market for 10 years, and today we have its continuation, Mark III. Just to start off, I always thought of X1 as a legendary controller. The most sold, the most widespread, and the most applicable to the club environment. All the crucial features you need in addition to standard mixer and CDJs that you probably would find in all the clubs. X1 just makes sense. I would even go and say that X1 and X1 Mark II are legendary, at least within Traktor community. So who would use it, where you might use it, and how you might use it? Right as you take the X1 out of the box, it says DAX and effects controller, and it already says a lot. The main use case for this controller is complementing external mixer and CDJs that you can find in the clubs. I'm from Kiev, Ukraine, and I cannot count how many times I saw Traktor DJs using X1s like this. What it means is that you come to the club with just an X1 and your laptop. Everything else is already there. To be honest, you don't even need CDJs, unless you want to do scratching or backspins, which, by the way, can be done using effects in Traktor. Back in the day, you also needed something like Audio 2, Audio 8, or similar external sound card, because mixers didn't have a USB connection to plug directly into your computer. You just needed to connect the outputs from your sound card to RCA inputs on the back of the mixer, and you were ready to go. Nowadays, it's not really an issue since most of the mixers have it. And if they don't, you can still buy an external sound card. All of this makes X1 an insanely portable powerhouse that covers all your DAC and effect needs. The controller comes in a nice package that includes power supply, all major electric socket types, softback to store your X1, USB-A to USB-B cable, and some stickers. The unit itself is made of high-quality plastic, and the bottom part is made of transparent plastic as well. I would be surprised if it was glass, since it's much easier to crack it. Every button click is distinct and feels like a high-quality product. Buttons themselves are made of rubber with a black coating on them. Therefore, they should not fade as the ones, for example, from the D2, as the major part of the surface is covered and protected. Encoders at the top have a high resistance and very pronounced zero position. The rotary encoders in the middle have a smooth feel with small clicks as you turn them. Here's how each button sounds when clicked. Also, by the way, you can replace the encoders if you want some customization. When compared to X1 and X1 Mark II, the Mark III is larger in every dimension. Here is a visual comparison to F1 and Z1, which would suggest you the difference in size between X1 Mark II and Mark III. The reason for this change is reducing potential miss triggers or accidental presses of neighboring buttons. By the way, it still fits in the backpack alongside my laptop. I honestly preferred smaller size from the previous generation, but maybe it's just me. You might be wondering how it looks next to the S4 Mark III or DJM mixer with CDJs. Unfortunately, I only have an S4, F1 and Z1 at my disposal, so here is how it looks with them. Also, here is a picture from all checks, putting it next to the turntable with DJM 900. Here is a mockup that will show you how it looks next to it. X1 Mark III comes with USB-A to USB-B cable out of the box. You might logically ask, why not USB Type-C? The answer is pretty straightforward. It's just more robust. Traktor team decided for USB-B connector to provide a more reliable and stable connection to the controller. With X1 Mark I, there was a lot of feedback from artists that USB-B socket was just too loose and it was too easy to plug out the cable when moving the controller around. With Mark II, Traktor introduced a more solid USB-B connector because of this. USB-C so far is just too loose for a connection like this, given the feedback that Traktor received over the years. The only thing I wish that there was a second cable from USB-C to USB-B in the box, so that I don't need to have a dongle or adapter in case my laptop only has USB-C ports. One of the useful features is the built-in USB hub. For those interested, it's 2.0, but worry not, it's perfectly fine for the use case, connecting other controllers, mixer, and CDJs to it. Without the hub, the unit draws 500 mA of power in its extreme setups, so you're able to use the X1 Mark III without the power supply. The power supply is only needed to power up the USB hub if you want to connect additional devices to it. X1 Mark III has colored LEDs at the base of the unit. I wouldn't treat it as a defining feature of X1 or something I would be excited about, but it's a nice addition in case you are into it. When used next to the mixer CDJ, the bottom LED lights are covered and not really visible. Traktor team said that this will be addressed once the updated X1 deck is available, as it will create some additional gap between mixer and decks. The current stand will not feed the new X1, as the new X1 has a bigger form factor. Also by design, these indicators are not essential, but rather a nice addition to what you can also see on the top displays, like track end warning or an active loop. For now, you cannot make it a light show or make it react to music, but Traktor team says they're going to continue to improve the product based on the community feedback. To me, this feature sounds super niche, but maybe if you're keen on having it, make some noise on Traktor forums. By the way, this can be turned off in case you are at a corporate event or you just don't want them. For this, just go into settings and disable. First of all, you'll need to install the latest 3.10 Traktor update in order to play with the X1 Mark III. Once you connect X1 to the computer, you'll see this boot up animation and be presented with various options to assign effect units and decks that you are going to control with X1. Click these buttons at the top to change FX unit assignments and rotate this at the bottom to change which decks are controlled. Effect units can then be changed as you play, but decks assignment can only be set on the startup of X1. I am going to select effect units 1 and 2, as well as decks A and B for this review. Upper section of X1 is where you control your effects. Right away, I can say that buttons' LED brightness levels are the same no matter if the unit is connected to power supply or not. The LED lights are quite dim. Traktor team said that they actually tried to keep the dim state as low as possible to increase the contrast within on state, so that even in bright sunlight there is a clear difference between off and on. But this is also one of the features that team is going to monitor for user feedback. At the very top, you'll find the mode selection button. Available modes now are effect controls for units 1 and 2, 3 and 4 in case you have this enabled in Traktor, and the mixer mode. Let's dive deep into the effects mode. In my opinion, MK3 greatly improves on this front, due to small screens that show you which parameter you control and software takeover guides. It makes it quite easy to navigate and control the effects. Now you don't necessarily need to look at the computer screen to understand which parameter you control. And I particularly love software takeover guides, because if you have presets of effects, it makes it much easier to know where you are. Here is an example. If I'm pressing Shift and this button at the top, it will switch the effects units back and forth between group and single mode. And now when I turn the encoder, I can see on the screen where I should turn it to get to the so-called software takeover point. See here, now I'm in single mode with reverb selected. I can turn the encoders and see the control parameter on the screen. Now I switch to group mode. You can see that positions of encoders in software do not correspond to the physical ones. If I move any of the physical encoders, I will see a handy guide where I shall turn it in order to match with software position. Once I reached it, everything is tied to physical position. By the way, you can change the color of each button on the X1 MK3 using Traktor settings without any MIDI mapping. I would say it's mostly for your convenience purposes. For example, if you are not comfortable remembering order of your knobs and effects. In case you come from the previous generation of Traktor hardware, all the knobs and buttons are not touch sensitive or capacitive, and all the screens on the controller are black and white. X1 MK3 has dedicated mixer mode out of the box. For this, just click this button at the top. You can control high, mid, low cues, as well as volume for both decks. Neighboring buttons are responsible for EQ band kills, as well as headphones cue. As for mixer effects, it's not something that comes with default mapping, but you will definitely be able to map it yourself using MIDI mode right now, or default remapping once this feature is available within Traktor. You might be wondering, why mixer mode? Based on Traktor team's research, they found out that many users are downloading MIDI mappings to convert their X1s into mixers. Based on this insight, team decided to bring mixer mode as an easily accessible feature for everyone, regardless of how familiar you are with MIDI mappings. As for the stems mode, I have it as a separate section of this video later. The lower section of X1 is meant for your transport controls. Hotcues, play pause, cue, sync, tempo, load, nudging, etc. First thing you might notice compared to the Mark II is that the Touchstrip is now gone. And of course there are reasons for it. Traktor team says that the feedback on the Touchstrip was pretty mixed, and it was not precise enough, especially for nudging, as well as had issues with wet hands. Therefore, they used the space to provide an additional row of buttons and added nudging controls to these buttons. Like on the MK1, by the way. As for seeking through the track, it now works via shift and loop encoders. And the seek size is linked to the currently selected loop size, which allows the user to either be super fine or coarse and quantized when jumping through the track. Me personally, I used touch strips back in the day with D2 and it was great. I kind of miss them, especially since you could do backspins and precise track scrubbing when paused. Browse encoders are pretty straightforward. Turn to scroll through the list of tracks and press to load to the corresponding deck. Hold Shift while turning to scroll the browser tree and press to open the folder. As previously mentioned, all the buttons and encoders on the Mark III are not touch sensitive or capacitive. It's different from Mark II, but the same as Mark I. To me, honestly, it doesn't matter. Both methods work fine and cover their purposes. First new thing you see as compared to the previous generations is the addition of OLED displays. By default, you can see on it your loop size, track title, and time remaining. To change it, go to Settings, where you can make it show your remaining time, your elapsed time, or just your loop size. Loop size is particularly handy in case you find loop information being too tight. Loop encoders work exactly as you would expect from any Traktor controller. Turn left and right to change size, press to set and activate the loop of selected size, hold Shift and turn to jump by selected size, and hold Shift and press to activate or deactivate the loop. In Settings, you will find few options to modify this behavior. Holding Shift and pushing the encoder will always be responsible for activating or deactivating loop, while Shift and turning the encoder can either be set to big jump or changing your key semitones. Unfortunately, there are no dedicated controls to move the active loop like you have on S4 Mark III. I personally use it all the time and find it very convenient to set the loop and move it a bit back in case I miss the time to set it correctly. Going down is your Hotcues section. There are 4 hotkey buttons for each DAC. By pressing it, you set or jump to your hotkey, and hold Shift while pressing Hotcues to delete them. The behavior of these buttons can be changed in settings. Here are all the possible options you can see within Traktor settings. As you can see with the settings, you can adjust your Shift layer to give you access to Hotcues 5 through 8. Traktor team learned that the majority of users only use up to 4 hotkeys, so they offer the access to 5 through 8 on the Shift layer. And of course, as stated before, Traktor team will monitor for user feedback to provide software improvements and default remapping in the future. Below the hotkeys are your Q and Ref buttons. Q sets a temporary cue point, while Ref plays in reverse when held and returns to where the track shall be when released. Pressing Shift with Q will jump to the beginning of the track, and pressing Shift with Ref will activate Flux mode, which lets you jump to hotkeys, activate loops within the track, while the track playback position is not affected when released. The next row are your nudge buttons, and this I use as a replacement to the Touchstrip if you don't want to use it for nudging, as well as change the behavior of Shift plus clicking. You can go into settings, and here are the possible options. Play button is easy, play and pause. If you hold Shift and start tapping this play button, it's going to serve the same purpose as this button over here in software. Sync button actually has more to it. Press it to activate sync, Shift and press it to make it master DAC, hold sync while turning the loop encoder to adjust tempo of the DAC. This big new sync button makes it easier to do these tempo adjustments with just one hand. You might be asking yourself why Traktor decided to make these 2 big buttons as play and sync. I believe the reason is that the 2 lower buttons are the only toggle buttons. These are your big on and off switches. All other buttons are performance triggers, which is why they are having a different shape. Cue and play buttons are also now positioned the way it's common with other Traktor DG controllers and marked as a whole, one below the other. To conclude this section, Mark III transport controls feel like a nice improvement over the previous generations. And going forward, I'd like to see some controls designed specifically for stems, sample controls, freeze mode, just as an example. Kind of like it was with D2, or the way it is right now on the S4 Mark III, where buttons are not labeled and they change behavior based on the mode that you selected. This is a good segue to talk about stems. There is no default stems mode, at least currently. Traktor team says they plan to listen to the community and see which features will be requested to further add them to the preferences as options. The way I envision it is an additional mode like the Mixer one that would transform knobs into stems filters and buttons next to them into on-off switches. And if you press Shift, you'll be able to turn on and off FX sense per stem. But it's just me dreaming about the future. By the way, if you don't know how to create the highest quality stems from any track, check out this video. Of course, you can already use MIDI-mapping for this. To turn the controller in a MIDI mode, just hold Shift and press this button at the top. There is no need in controller editor additional software. All the MIDI channels are already predefined within the controller. This also means that you can MIDI map this controller to basically any software, like Ableton here, for example. Of course, screens will be blank, but all the other controls will work. Another example is if you want to map crossfader. Using MIDI mapping, you'll be able to do so within the Traktor software. There is no built-in sound card. According to Traktor team, adding an audio interface would have further increased the price, and knowing that the majority of setups where current X1s are being used already having an audio interface in the mixer or an external one, they just didn't want users having to pay for features that the majority will not make use of. To me, it's not a big deal, and it kind of makes sense. Looking at the current market, the only alternative you might consider is Xone K2. But honestly, this unit is outdated, doesn't provide zero position click for knobs at the top, and is geared more towards MIDI-mapping enthusiasts and not necessarily regular Traktor DJs. Now is the time for the extra questions that I gathered while preparing this review. Does it make sense to use X1 next to S4? It absolutely does, in case you want to have control of FX units 3 and 4, and also to control DACs C and D separately, for example, instead of switching DACs using buttons on S4. Does it use QML code, including screen output? Yep, here is a glimpse of what the files are. iPad compatibility. Traktor team has no plan so far to enable compatibility of this unit for iOS. Can it work standalone? No. Will there be an accompanying updated Z1? I also want to see that one. For example, adding mixer effects to it. Standalone units. As I'm not part of Traktor team, I don't know if there are any plans for standalone Traktor gear. On the website, there is a cool looking VESA mount, so you can mount them behind a mixer. Is this going to be an actual product? As far as I can see, it's just part of Native Instruments marketing materials. Here is the newly released S-series keyboards that utilize the same theme. Is this sign of new controller coming up? In my opinion, Native Instruments recently rebranded themselves, as well as Traktor, and if I were to guess, they need now to update all their gear to match new branding. As for can I use it with D2, S4 and other controllers? Yes, this is just an additional controller you can use for anything designed or not designed for. As a bonus feature, here is how to enable Vegas mode on the X1 Mark III. Hold both arrow buttons on the top right while powering up the unit. Now the X1 is lit. Thanks for tuning in and being with me for this review. It took a lot of time and effort to cover all the possible areas of the controller, but in case you find something that is missing, please leave the comment below and I'll see what I can do. That's been it. Peace.